Ignition sequence start. 6, 5.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Dr. von Braun was an inspiration to all the people, I think, who met him. Through the people that he worked with, we made the selection to build the Saturn V rocket.
There is a wealth of captured Nazi documentation, captured by the Americans, by the British, much of it with the signature or initials of Wernher von Braun and others. And those documents bear silent tribute, so to speak, to the crimes in which those men were involved.
Well, I'm sure without Wernher von Braun we would not have been on the moon, and we probably would never have started a very active space program.
He was on the cover of Life and Time and many other magazines. He was a hero. He was a great space visionary. You know, he was a great asset to the United States in terms of both military and civilian rocket development.
It was controversial enough that we were using people who had formerly worked for Hitler on our own military projects. The American public, I think, would never have tolerated this had they known that these men had not just been engaged in work for the Nazis, but had been involved in the use of concentration camp inmates under horrific conditions. That is, that they were involved in Nazi crimes.
He was an uncommon and unusual personality in every respect. He was extremely intelligent, of course. He was very good looking. Some people told him that he should go to the movies right away. Here.
That's you?
Yes.
And I myself am up here in the top row up there. And this picture was taken in Fort Bliss.
There was a direct heritage in this rocket development that von Braun and his associates did, from the V-2 missile for Germany to the Redstone missile for the United States to the Saturn launch vehicles, and then Saturn V, you know, for landing on the moon.
Well, one of the tragedies of American history is that the rocket that took humankind to the moon, the Apollo 11 mission, was built by individuals like Lost Von Braun and Arthur Rudolph, who were complicit in the criminal utilization of concentration camp inmates under Nazi German auspices during World War II.
The German military supported the development because they wanted to have a defense weapon, as it is the duty of a military of any country, including Germany, to be prepared for defense.
And I came in 1940 to Peenemünde, and my first job was to develop these individual elements that you may have seen on the V2 rocket engine. There are 18 injection elements, and the development and the improvement of these engines, that was my initial job. And since apparently I did a pretty good job here, I eventually was put in charge of the complete rocket engine.
Hitler came, and Hitler at first did not believe in rockets, and he kept that negative attitude at rockets until 1943. At that time, Germany had lost the air war against England. Hitler wanted to do something, and then he came to the rockets and said, well, there are these guys in Peenemünde who are building those rockets, and maybe we can use these for our armament.
Well, the V2 production was moved underground after the air raid on Peenemünde of August 17th, 18th, 1943 by the RAF. The SS and the Armaments Ministry collaborated on moving underground because of the threat to V2 production by Allied air power.
And that is how the military use of the rocket that Von Braun developed came into the forefront.
When we got into Dora, we were unloaded, 100 people in a car. We were unloaded, and we were put in that tunnel.
Imagine, if you will, that these prisoners were brought down to a subterranean factory of enormous dimensions to work on a weapon that had, to that point, existed solely in the realm of science fiction. It was right out of Flash Gordon. No one had ever built an operational missile before. And here was this enormous weapon that the prisoners knew was going to be launched against some of their home countries. Very courageously, prisoners engaged in sabotage.
Naturally, there was a lot of sabotage. The Russian, the French, and the Poles were very much involved in sabotage. They used to hang 5 people a day in the entrance of the tunnel to make sure that everybody knew that if they were caught in sabotage, they were next. So
every day?
Every day.
And the tunnels at that time, that end, were unheated, they were unair conditioned, they were cold, they were damp, they were dank. Because of prisoners living underground, they soon became completely dirty and unhygienic. The prisoners did not have adequate water. They were often forced to drink their own urine. The thirst drove them crazy. There was no washing facilities. The result, of course, of that was very rapidly massive outbreak of lice, typhoid, and pneumonia and other diseases that set in particularly in December, January, February, March, in 1943-44.
A friend of mine who even wrote a book, he slept in one area, and for days he was wondering how come his mattress was so big. He realized there was somebody under his mattress who had died a week ago. He didn't even realize it. The conditions were awful. Dying became part of life in the tunnel. I saw people
skeleton people. I mean, 80 pounds, 60 pounds. They were nothing but bones. Couldn't eat. That was the worst part. And for months and months, no light, no nothing. Just work, work, and work. I'm getting very nervous just talking about it. Hmm? No, I'm okay.
What were you saying?
I'm getting nervous just thinking about it. I know that the next few days I'm going to have sleepless night. Every time I talk about it, I get very restless. I see back all those things. As a human, you cannot describe what the German did to the human being. They humanized us, like I say, like an animal who had to work like a slave. I see myself like a slave. There is a very small space between humanity and animal. Very, very small.
My estimate of the total death toll in my book was 10,000 for Dora. And the reason I gave that number was because of the approximately 20,000 prisoners who died in the Dora camp system, many of them died in sub-camps that were unconnected to the V2 program. So that you cannot attribute the entire 20,000 deaths to the V2 program.
When I was growing up, von Braun and his rocket colleagues were the so-called good Nazis. They were celebrated on the cover of Life magazine. They were the subject of a Norman Rockwell portrait. And there was always a little nervous giggle when von Braun was mentioned. He is referenced by intimation in that great Tom Lehrer song about launching rockets into the air. But these were the good Nazis. These were our Nazis. Who would have thought that even the good Nazis, our Nazis, were involved in Nazi crimes, that they were Nazi criminals?
Did you ever see von Braun at Peenemünde?
Sure, we saw von Braun. We saw von Braun, we saw Himmler, we saw Goering. They all came to see the ultimate weapon.
The best evidence against von Braun, Rudolph, and some of the others is their own signature on captured Nazi documents, documents that were captured especially by American and British forces at war's end. And those documents we have in significant numbers.
The decision to use the forced labors, the concentration camp inmates, was a decision by primarily Himmler and with him also Speer, and they decided that one should use the captive inmates and should use them to manufacture the rocket in the Mittelwerk, in the underground factory. Von Braun tried to dissuade them.
In von Braun's case, you've got his initials and his signature on documents relating to the selection of concentration camp inmates to work on particular projects in which he had a special interest. You have both Rudolph and von Braun at a meeting with the SS on the subject of taking more captives in France and bringing them to Germany to work as concentration camp inmates on the V2 program.
And this document is from von Braun to Director Savatsky of the Mittelwerk on the 15th of August, 1944, and it talks about setting up a workshop in the tunnels, and the key paragraphs are here, the second paragraph, in which he talks about following Savatsky's suggestion to go to Buchenwald and to get prisoners from Buchenwald who have technical skills transferred to Dora in order to set up this workshop for ground vehicle test devices. By the fact that he was in Buchenwald and talked to the camp commandant implicates him in the use of concentration camp labor.
This is a document from August 2, 1969. It's just about 2 weeks after Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon. And it's a letter from Wernher von Braun, signed von Braun, to Major General Julius Klein, a retired U.S. military officer. But the most interesting part of this Apollo 11 letter is the PS. And in the PS, von Braun acknowledges that he had indeed been a member of the dreaded SS. And then in the last paragraph of his long PS, he writes, "I would appreciate it if you kept this information to yourself, as I think it could only harm my work at NASA if all this were given undue publicity, particularly at this time." And then it's initialed WVB, Wernher von Braun.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The mass production of the V2 was done in the Mittelwerk, that was about in the center of Germany, in the underground factory. The development was done in Peenemünde and the testing was done in Peenemünde. There was very little contact between the two.
You were slave labor at Peenemünde?
What were we? We were 400 French, 400 Russian, and I think 400 Polish.
At Peenemünde?
At Peenemünde.
And again, as Ernst said, the Peenemünde people had really nothing to do with it at all. That was strictly a decision by the SS.
Yes, there was a small concentration camp that was set up in Peenemünde in 1943 at the beginning of the production program at Peenemünde. And concentration camp labor was also used in other production sites for the V2 program. And then, of course, Dora was created underground after the air raid on Peenemünde, and that led to the development of slave labor production on a large scale.
Now, when I was in Peenemünde, I was responsible for the construction of Doppler tracking systems. And when the war ended, I was offered a job by the Army, American Army. So I came in '45 to Fort Bliss. That is Instrument Society of America. These are service medals from NASA. There, first we fired a few V2s, and then we started with development of the first missile here, that was the Redstone. One of my buddies, and Dr. Grüne, he died already, his wife is still living there. He had to go to Mittelwerk once for a week or so for documentation, you know. Yeah. And he came back and he said, "Gosh, I wish we have food like they have." Do you know? That means they were feeding them very well because they wanted them to do work. So, see, what he says is slave labor. It was slaving so far that they were forced to work there. Yeah, and probably if they try to, you know, try to make some trouble, they put them in jail or what, I have no idea. But on the other hand, they were fed very well to be sure the production is high. Yeah?
I can believe.
What is your reaction to what you've just seen on camera?
Oh, well, if you just look at the picture of the skeleton in Dora, you cannot say they were treated well and they had good food. I mean, it's unbelievable that somebody can make a statement like this when 20 or 30,000 people died for hunger, on malnutrition, on worked hard. I mean, he's lying, or he's not aware. I wouldn't say lying, maybe. He was told a propaganda story from his superior. But if he was there, he could have seen the people. And in Peenemünde, he must have seen the people, because he worked in Peenemünde from his own statement. And we were in Peenemünde, we worked in Peenemünde to build the Peenemünde, to make sure we did all the labor work there. So he hasn't told the truth, I'm sorry.
But most of the Peenemünders were never in Middelburg. I was never there. I had no way of knowing. And besides that, the real situation at the concentration camps, which was so terrible and absolutely horrible, there's no doubt about that, that was not known to most of the Germans. I had not known it until I came to this country and then learned and heard about it. But before that, I did not know what has been going on.
Do you believe that to be true?
Well, if he was in Peenemünde, he must have seen us.
You saw what was going on there. You were there yourself.
I mean, I was in Peenemünde. So were 1,200 prisoners. I mean, he must have been blind. He must have blinders on, not to see the 1,200 prisoners who did all the labor work.
Did you ever go to needlework? Did you ever see the production there?
Well, I had to go there because due to the material shortage, we had to make design changes all the time. And again, to demonstrate that the vehicle was really not ready for military use was the fact that we had, I think it was 34,000 changes.
You can see their point of view? What do you
Well,
mean by that?
but I can see they're defending themselves. They don't want to tell the world the truth. So they're defending themselves. They're telling us a lie that they didn't know what's going on. So did most, 90% of the Germans. Nobody knew there was concentration. Nobody knew what they did to the Jews in Germany. Nobody knew the Kristallnacht and all those things, what happened. But they all knew what's going on. They saw the dead, they smelled the crematorium all the time in Dora. They couldn't even burn them fast enough. They had to dig holes, put him in the holes and put gasoline and burn him. And if you ever see hundreds of body flesh being burned, you know it smells. That's all I have to say.
There is a reason that Americans say, gee, we never knew about this. And the reason is it was very much in the interest of the governments that won the war, East and West, but particularly the United States, to keep a lid on what we had discovered when we liberated Dora Nordhausen. And so Americans were told almost nothing about this. Instead, Americans were told about other camps that we liberated, like Dachau in particular. But Dora Nordhausen was largely kept quiet.
On the one hand, one arm of the United States Army prosecuted the war criminals in the Nordhausen trial at Dachau in 1947, and another arm of the U.S. Army, namely Army Ordnance, contributed to trying to keep the German rocket people away from that war crimes trial and keep the whole thing quiet.
They can excuse him all they want. He was the head of that department. He knew the dead. He knew the people hanging. He knew all those things. It's good to say today, 50 years or 60 years later, while he maybe wasn't guilty. He's guilty. Guilty is sin.
When the astronauts were dealing with Von Braun, they didn't know anything about the Dora story. They knew nothing, essentially. And you know, the overwhelming experience you have with people who knew Von Braun in the United States is, you know, they're not interested in discussing at length the German situation, because they basically accepted the Cold War rationale for bringing him here, and they had very positive experiences with him personally.
I was not aware of any of these stories that I think people who do research and the media want to create something of news, so they want to dig up whatever they can, and I feel in a lot of ways that that's motivated not by really a search for the truth, but can we come up with something that's different, sensational? Can we create a hero? Can we create a person who really does great things for us? And then can we find something in his background that we can criticize?
As a man, he was a compassionate person. He was concerned about other people. He was concerned, he took an interest in all of his employees, their families.
So I don't really put too much stock in those stories, and I'm certainly not that interested in delving into somebody's background. All sorts of things are done for a person's country by direction of those above us.
It's important to remember in the case of von Braun, in the case of Rudolph and some of the others, we're not just talking about some men who worked for an evil regime. We're talking about men who themselves took part in Nazi crimes. This isn't just guilt by association. It's not just that some of them were in the SS or the Nazi Party. They were personally complicit in Nazi crimes. The same kinds of crimes for which Albert Speer was convicted at Nuremberg. People like von Braun and Rudolph should have been prosecuted.
I nominated him for the International Boss of the Year, and he won it because he was truly the Boss of the Year.
Unfortunately, von Braun died before the U.S. government, belatedly in 1979, created this office and seriously undertook to investigate Nazis living in the United States. Had he still been alive, there is no doubt that he would have become a major subject of federal investigation.
Von Braun had the idea to go into space as a boy of about 12 or 13 years of age. And at that time he told his mother, he said, "Mother, I would like to spend my life opening the gateway to heavens for mankind." Doesn't that sound great?
That's been a thorn in me for so long about this. He was a genius. He did a lot of good work for the United States, but he should have been not recognized as a hero. It's like a mass murder letting him loose because he invented something. You wouldn't do that in this country.
Some of these people not only got away with murder, they got away with some very impressive American honors. Certainly von Braun and Rudolph received very high civilian honors, and the glorification of these people goes on. Go to Huntsville, you'll see the Werner von Braun Civic Center. It still bears his name.
Von Braun had this heroic image that Huntsville, Alabama hasn't gotten quite past yet, because it's difficult to deal with the fact that this local hero has this unpleasant aspects of his past.
The people of Huntsville think of Dr. Werner von Braun's contribution far more than exceeds what happened in space. Space was part of it. They look at him as a visionary who brought in a cultural community in the arts and sciences, and with the groups that were brought in to administer space technology, was also brought in a whole new culture to the area, from the museum to the ballet to the plays to the fine arts to the educational levels, the Science Institute, and other areas that are very important to a solid economic base.
Apollo 11 and the landing on the moon was a great technological achievement for the United States, and that marked, I think, a new era in the human race's expansion into the universe. But the sacrifice of the prisoners at Dora should be remembered as part of that story. That is the most important thing, because for 30 or more years, this country and others participated in essentially the cover-up or the disinterest in that story, that little was said about the prisoners, that their sacrifice, that their suffering was not remembered. Little was said about the prisoners, that their sacrifice, that their suffering was not remembered, was really disgraceful. And we need now to remember, while we celebrate Apollo 11, we need to remember those prisoners at the same time, that they sacrificed too, and that they had something to do with the landing on the moon.
I want you to read this. Everything science has taught me and continues to teach me strengthens my belief in the continuity of our spiritual existence after death. Wernher von Braun.
When did he write that to you?
Oh, he wrote that for some magazine who had asked him whether he believed in God.
Like a lot of people who came out of the 60s, I had faith that humans are inherently good, and that they would, with the right societies and conditions, inhumanity and abuse could be stopped. But don't have that much faith anymore in my middle age, because I see a persistent pattern in the human race of murder and abuse and enslavement that has existed throughout our history, and all we can do is hope that we have the right kinds of societies and political institutions to stop human rights abuses, enslavement, and murder.
A lot of people don't even know that you guys, the German rocket scientists, set us on the moon. How do you feel about that?
Well, we, of course, have the hopes that in the long run the truth will come out.
Top row up there, and this picture was taken in Fort Bliss.
There was a direct heritage in this rocket development that von Braun and his associates did, from the V-2 missile for Germany to the Redstone missile for the United States to the Saturn launch vehicles, and then Saturn V, for landing on the moon.
Well, one of the tragedies of American history is that the rocket that took humankind to the moon, the Apollo 11 mission, was built by individuals like Wernher von Braun and Arthur Rudolph, who were complicit in the criminal utilization of concentration camp inmates under Nazi German auspices during.
Dr. von Braun was an inspiration to all the people, I think, who met him. Through the people that he worked with, we made the selection to build the Saturn V rocket.
There is a wealth of captured Nazi documentation, captured by the Americans, by the British, much of it with the signature or initials of Wernher von Braun and others. And those documents bear silent tribute, so to speak, to the crimes in which those men were involved.
Well, I'm sure without Wernher von Braun we would not have been on the moon, and we probably would never have started a very active space program.
Because on the cover of Life and Time and many other magazines. He was a hero. He was a great space visionary. He was a great asset to the United States in terms of both military and civilian rocket development.
It was controversial enough that we were using people who had formerly worked for Hitler on our own military projects. The American public, I think, would never have tolerated this had they known that these men had not just been engaged in work for the Nazis, but had been involved in the use of concentration camp inmates under horrific conditions. That is, that they were involved in Nazi crimes.
Ignition sequence start. 6.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
He was an uncommon and unusual personality in every respect. He was extremely intelligent, of course. He was very good looking. Some people told him that he should go to the movies right away.
Here.
That's you?
Yes.
And I myself am up here